see the person speaking, you can click speaker view, and then I'll become nice and big on your screen. If you want to, for those of you who are not speaking, if you want to mute yourselves, that's perfect, ideal. And I'm going to jump right in. So, hello everyone. I haven't introduced myself yet, but I've been chatting this whole time. So for those of you that don't know, my name is Margaux Miller. I'm the program director with Tech Manitoba. I'm also the host of a local podcast called Start Podcast. And that makes me even more delighted to be your host this evening because it's something I truly enjoy. So thank you to ManACE for providing us this opportunity to host a technology information night. So tonight. And just a reminder, as Paula mentioned, that this session is being recorded and portions of it might be reused in the future. So, but we do encourage your participation and thank you all for being here tonight. Our team at Tech Manitoba is particularly excited to have been able to partner with ICTC, so the Information Communication Technology Council, to bring you a discussion panel focusing on digital equity in Manitoba education. So Tech Manitoba, on a normal day, we represent Manitoba's growing tech sector. So we're an industry-led nonprofit association, and our goal is to help companies to thrive and grow through collaboration, education, and promotion. And if you're interested in becoming more involved in technology, we also host events and discussion opportunities on a regular basis, this being an example of one, but there are many kind of across the board, from getting more women involved in tech to youth in tech to research and more in-depth projects like the one we're going to talk about tonight. And really, we have great opportunities to network and learn from professionals in the technology industry. And to stay up to date, we encourage you to sign up for our newsletter with Tech Manitoba if you'd like, and Paula will throw that in the chat for you. Paula also is very helpful behind the scenes here today. So if you are having any trouble with Zoom for some reason or have any particular questions, you can reach out to her in the chat at the bottom there and just find Paula Canis from our team. Now, if you are new also to who the team is at ICTC, I'll tell you that they are a not-for-profit national center of expertise for the digital economy. ICTC is the trusted source for evidence-based policy advice for forward-looking research and creative capacity-building programs for the digital economy. Now, we were very excited in July of this summer to enlist the expertise of ICTC and of Brandon University's Center for Aboriginal and Rural Education Studies, so BU Cares, as well as the Rural Development Institute, all together to assist us in conducting research around the current state of digital literacy, specifically with a focus on inadequate and inequitable access to internet connectivity, and specifically its effects on education and learning in Manitoba. And so hopefully if you're here tonight, that's also something that is important to you. And we really have conducted this research in two phases, where phase one was undertaken by ICTC, who's going to present to you right away today, and will be the subject of our discussion panel tonight as well. And then phase two, which will really be spearheaded by Brandon University, and will be the primary research, will be around primary research, guided by the findings in this phase one that you're going to learn about here. So basically all that to say, we're not going away with this topic anytime soon, that we really believe in ensuring that this information is really clear and valuable and provided to stakeholders like yourselves and hopefully more. The final report is going to be expected out in the next month for this phase one. And to give us an overview of findings so far, we are fortunate enough to have with us today a gentleman helping to make all this possible, and that's Nathan Snider. So Nathan, you can, there you are, you can hopefully see his video, and I'll spotlight him in just a moment. So Nathan, thank you for being here. Nathan is the manager of research and stakeholder engagement for the Information and Communications Technology Council, so known as ICTC. And Nathan has taught in the School of Business and Management at Canadore College, as well as at Cambrian College. He sits on Nipissing University's Alumni Association Board, the board of directors for the Near North Mobile Media Lab. So their goal there is to provide northern communities the means to produce and present media art. He's also the co-founder of Co-Design, which is North Bay's design and technology meetup network. And through his work, Nathan has been a committed advocate for tech accessibility in northern Canadian communities. And so we were really, fortunate when we first spoke to Nathan about this project that it was something that he found, near and dear. And his previous research is also focused on social and economic barriers of the ICT field, specifically facing Indigenous communities in Canada, as well as tech equity issues as they relate to broadband connectivity and low-income families. And so we have him here with us today to present on this phase 1 of the newest research project here with Tech Manitoba and ICTC and Brennan University all together. And Nathan, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a very warm greeting, so thank you so much for that. I'm just going to take a second to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see it once we start rolling. I just wanted to start by saying that obviously, just given the nature of everyone that's participating in today's conversation, like some of this information is going to be, as though I'm preaching to the choir, a bunch of subject matter experts in and of yourselves. My opportunity here is to share a little bit about the research study that we're just wrapping up right now, because a lot of the information that we're collecting has brought to light situations and instances that I think quite a few of you are already familiar with. However, those that aren't, some of this might be eye-opening. But part of this is actually going to be showcasing opportunities as opposed to just a variety of different potential barriers for Northern Manitoban communities. So I'm actually joined today by my colleague Sylvie, who's going to be speaking in the next little while. But I just want to say thanks, obviously, to the involvement of Brandon University and more so Tech Manitoba. This has been an excellent relationship. You're going to be meeting Joel, if you haven't already, in the next little bit. It was just kind of a slam dunk right from the get-go. We have a lot of similarities in terms of our interest groups and the membership that you serve and the population that we're interested in helping enable in a technically forward way. So I'm just going to start my presentation here. We will have an opportunity towards the end for any questions that might get raised. So by all means, once we go, please do take notes, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. Okay. So ongoing research. So in our relationship with Tech Manitoba, we set out to seek clarity on the relationship between broadband infrastructure and the issue of tech equity. So I'll be explaining that in a little bit, but the goal or the hope was that we were going to be aiding in the development and enhancement of provincial strategies in Manitoba. So really this is going to be sort of a phase 1, as Margaux put it, and kind of pointing us in a future direction, continued direction, to try to advocate for better broadband infrastructure because of its impacts, its positive implications on the educational experience of youth across the province. So this is going to be an environmental scan. So all the information that you're seeing today is representative data that's publicly available, but rather what we did was collect and synthesize that data to help present a little bit of a clearer picture of what the context looks like in Manitoba and similarities internationally. So that's what we're going to be sharing today. So the exploration. So one of the things that we tried to set out to do with this study was explore the development of key policy recommendations needed to address the concept of digital equity. So I think we're all pretty familiar with that, but I'll explain that in a bit too. So the goal is to develop the pathways for youth and potentially educators, such as yourselves, from across Manitoba to become better equipped to participate in the province's digital economy. So the digital economy is something, it's a term that's frequently used both by Tech Manitoba and associations across Canada, including our own. The digital economy is essentially the revenue generating elements of the digital sphere that play into Canada's GDP. So broadband access. So this concept of digital equity. So digital equity is a term that many people use in a variety of different fields, disciplines, and crafts. What I wanted to do was, as part of this study, kind of hone in on one definition to really kind of break apart what it means. Like, what does digital equity actually mean for those that it impacts, and for those policymakers that might be shaping important decisions around how best to enable communities in this regard. So it's broken into 5 kind of key sections here. And these are going to be important because elements of phase 2, which Margaux has already mentioned, are really going to be continuing to explore that under the guidance and leadership of Brandon University. But the first one is access to hardware, software, and connectivity. So connectivity is kind of the goal of this research study, just taking a look at what that looks like across the province. It also means access to meaningful, high quality, culturally relevant content in local languages. So again, this is really taking a look at the Northern Manitoban communities, Indigenous populations that are represented there, trying to understand and enable voices to be heard that in traditional colonialistic contexts might be missed. The next is access to creating, sharing, and exchanging digital content. So this is really interesting because this really plays into the educational piece. Access to educators who know how to use digital tools and resources. So those that pertain to instructors, and even at a higher level, associations like Tech Manitoba. And lastly, access to high quality research on the application of digital technologies to enhance learning. So really, what kind of research can go into playing a larger role in the shaping of how technology is used to enhance the concept of learning. So when I was trying to put together this presentation to synthesize what turned out to be a very large study, we ended up trying to choose kind of bits and pieces that I think would be relevant for everyone listening today. So the first one is recent COVID-19 pandemic has really necessitated this transition, this immediate widespread adoption of online distance learning. Obviously, that has heavy implications to broadband infrastructure and the experience at home. So some previous students who lacked internet opportunities, internet access at home, were able to make use of equipment and access points at schools or libraries. And these have been closed for public health reasons. So this is previous to say that individuals used to be able to go to places like schools to actually engage in the digital ecosystem. As a result of this transition for home, that opportunity wasn't available to everybody. And there's actually a recent ICTC study that we're just wrapping up as well, that's running in parallel with this one, that highlights that issues of economic inequality were highlighted by several respondents. So we ended up surveying educators from across Canada about this exact issue. And we heard back from several of the respondents saying that this isn't an isolated instance. This is a relatively, it's a common theme. So shared PCs at home among siblings and their working parents and limited broadband speeds were cited several times as, and I use this term specifically here, critical issues impacting those primarily from low economic regions. So this isn't to say this is an issue that really impacts urban communities, but this is those that impact low economic regions, which is often, but not always, rural. And lastly, these issues were cited as negatively impacting an educator's ability to both learn and also leverage educational technologies. So part and parcel with limited broadband infrastructure, or even opportunities at home, well, how does one actually leverage educational technologies if that opportunity doesn't exist? So the lack of connectivity and related training either completely discouraged or made their use literally impossible. So education and ed tech, so we wanted to kind of highlight a few different organizations within the province. Obviously, I believe just about everyone here is well aware of these organizations, but Canary is a federal partner in Canada's research, National Research and Education Network, so NREN, and they provide connectivity across provinces and they do work internationally. So one of the reasons why we want to highlight them is because the research, education, and innovations pass along data and technology across the province and the world. So the idea here is that it's essentially a knowledge exchange opportunity that they enable. And this obviously has implications specifically in the education sphere. So Manitoba's Regional Advanced Research and Education Network, or MRNet, is another contributor to Canada's NREN. I'm going to trip up over that a few times, I think. And they work to provide high-speed fiber optic internet and connect researchers and educators to the rest of the world. So what's interesting to note here is that during this study, we actually had an opportunity to bring together stakeholders from across the province to really get involved in the research study, kind of lend a little bit of insight. And this organization really came to light to be able to share certain information to say, okay, we're going to actually help guide this study to a certain degree by providing opportunities to take a look at not research so much as evidence that might exist for us to consider. And then lastly, Manitoba's Education, Research, and Learning Information Network, so MERLIN. So obviously, I don't have to get into too much detail there. But I wanted to highlight these because unlike some other provinces, having opportunities to connect with these three types of knowledge exchange networks and associations, what they allow us to do is kind of see or understand the concept of educational technologies, education and broadband infrastructure sort of at a deeper subdermal level. We wanted to kind of talk about and explore a little bit about broadband education and tech equity here. So really quickly, I just want to summarize these two areas. So digital trends in the classroom. So it's just important for those that might not be aware, but given the audience today, obviously you're going to be well connected to this. A lot of classes are turning to online learning and online homework. This was actually a trend that existed prior to COVID. I think the emergency transition to a remote working or remote learning rather environment sort of expedited that process. Certain provinces, certain communities, and even down to the individual school were doing this at different paces. And I think this transition sort of helped highlight this type of trend that was pre-existing. 75% of teachers are assigning homework that requires internet. This is just based on need, necessity. Obviously, it's not being done intentionally to provide further inequalities, but this is a reality of this remote learning experience that we're going through. And just to skip over one, but many of the teachers now find a way to achieve equity in the classroom by assigning two mechanisms for homework, online and physical. So part of our research actually highlighted that certain schools were doing this, certain school districts were doing this to sort of address this issue of inequality, even at the homestead. So shared PCs, things like that. Certain educators were actually sending physical copies of homework to try to close that tech equity gap. Obviously, there was still a need, but there was certain kind of emergency responses done to sort of address that. And customized learning experiences and accessibility. So customized learning experiences sort of highlighted the ability to allow students to learn in different ways. So I wanted to bring this up because this kind of brokers the concept of tech equity in a slightly different way. Learning management systems, certain learning management systems have been designed to actually understand and evaluate a student's learning experience to such a degree that in some cases it actually identifies a potential learning disability that might not have been previously identified and notifies not only the student, but in some instances, educators. So it's really taking the concept of accessibility and equity in that regard and bringing it to a whole new level. This isn't to say this is a perfect system by any means, there's challenges there, but it's an interesting opportunity when considering accessibility and tech equity in a different way. So digitized learning experiences also help students learn in the way that best suits them. So in some cases, we've all heard time and time again the concept of learning styles. Again, I'm sort of preaching to the choir, but this is really interesting because this allows the concept of transitioning to a remote learning environment does allow some kind of nuances that are advantageous, one of which being individualized learning experiences. And one of those being, if you have a specific learning style that applies well to a digital learning environment, well, lo and behold, that's a great connection. So I wanted to include this here, but this was actually a quote that we identified, and I think it does a really good job summarizing a point that we're trying to make. And a lack of digital access is a lack of access to education, period. So when talking about the idea of digital connectivity and the concept of education and even learning management systems, like we just explored in the previous slide, without that infrastructure in place, simply put, education can't exist. And especially now in a COVID world, post-COVID world, hopefully around the corner, even though we're in a second wave, at least in Ontario, we just can't enable that learning opportunity and that learning experience. So I've just highlighted here, and we'll be sure to pass the slide deck around after today's session, but COVID accelerated connectivity solutions really provided an opportunity to, again, kind of hone in on the experience that we're currently going through. So the pandemic-related closure of schools and workplaces actually shined a spotlight on the existing digital divide and drove creative solutions to actually provide some of that internet connectivity. In fact, I know Tech Manitoba, not from an education infrastructure standpoint, but actually provided in certain instances equipment to those in need. And it's thanks to those kind of creative solutions and the ability to think quickly, like Tech Manitoba, that they're able to actually address certain community-based needs. And that unfortunately is a sort of a serendipitous, I want to say happy accident as a result of COVID, because it provided opportunities for creative solutions in that regard. Internationally, we have certain examples like the New Zealand government who worked with telecommunications providers, specifically Chorus, to provide 50,000 free home-based broadband connections to students lacking internet. There's an Ontario example as well, specifically Rogers, that connected with the Toronto District School Board to actually provide physical devices to students with internet-connected, internet-enabled 3G and 4G networks to actually allow them, again, the opportunity to still engage with online learning, but in more of a kind of a creative manner. Those that didn't have the opportunity at home previously due to a variety of different socioeconomic issues, well, now they have this creative kind of partnership. The city of Coachella in California purchased 3,000 personal Wi-Fi hotspots, which is even more of a unique kind of approach to place in homes to ensure students have internet access. There's examples up in Yukon where the schools themselves actually became a wireless hotspot hub to be able to provide a broadcasted wireless network outside of the physical school itself so that students could still come to the location instead of vehicles and whatever else. Again, there's issues there, but the idea was that they would still be that sort of that hub that students can come to connect to the internet to be able to address their schoolwork. So I'm talking a lot about the education piece. Now I'm going to transition really quickly, just as a matter of time, to the December of 2016, where the CRTC, which is the Canadian Radio, Television, Telecommunications, Telecommunications Commission, actually declared high-speed internet a fundamental basic service here in Canada. There's a variety of different issues associated with the rollout of this strategy, but the idea here is that broadband infrastructure was essentially a basic telecom service to be provided to anywhere. So that's important to kind of keep in mind, because that is technically considered the federal baseline. At this time, the CRTC acknowledged 82% of Canadians had access to those speeds, but this level of service was not available to rural and northern communities. I'm going to get into at a really high level here, but the study does a deep dive into what these type of connectivity levels look like in Manitoba. So when taking into consideration rural and northern communities, as Manitobans yourself, you understand the impact that that has specifically on your province. So broadband access in Manitoba specifically, if we were to kind of go into a slightly deeper level, Manitoba has the second slowest broadband download speeds in all of Canada, second only to the Yukon. The Canadian average is about 15 to 25 megabytes, and this like varies city to city, province to province, but Manitoba's average download speed is 12.6 megabytes per second. So Manitoba is within the average price range for broadband, though pricing is much higher in rural communities versus urban centers. So this has a variety of different reasons why, from satellite connectivity to poor broadband infrastructure, and as a result, the telecoms kind of concept of ROI here. But the idea here is that broadband infrastructure, the price point is higher. Outside of dense urban centers, rural and remote communities have to pay exponentially higher broadband costs. And most rural and remote northern communities do have access to broadband, creating a large gap in service. So broadband access in households. So I've just kind of created some stats. I don't want to just read this to you because, well, quite frankly, that's pretty boring for you. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight here is 91% of Canadians 15 plus use the internet. And among seniors, the proportion was 71%, a large increase from 2012. So often there seems to be this understanding that internet usage and internet connectivity are really only impacting those that are in high school and potentially their working careers. But the reality here is like a societal trend is pointing upwards in terms of traditional internet usage. So the concept that the CRTC has mandated there to be broadband infrastructure across Canada, well, we have to think about the consideration of, well, this is impacting now our seniors, this is impacting very young children, all the way to prior to JK. And the idea here is that this is no longer an issue that can be pushed aside. COVID, in addition to changing age demographics and the usage of internet connectivity, these are changes now that are impacting everyone across the board. Equity, tech equity, and education, they're all synonymous in that equation because realistically, we're taking a look at a much larger societal issue here. Median download speeds increased from 46% from 2019 to 2020, and we've provided the stats. And these are typical increases or median increases that impact, as we just learned, primarily urban centers. Case studies. So there's a couple case studies that I thought were really interesting to highlight because there's a lot of similarities between what we've highlighted here and the instances and the ecosystem all the way down to the geography, literally the bedrock of Manitoba, where lessons could be learned from what's happening internationally. In fact, not too long ago, about a year and a half ago, I was in Thompson myself speaking at a conference, and I happened to meet a gentleman from not Australia, but New Zealand, which is going to come in a later slide. And the whole concept was that I was pointing out these similarities between infrastructure challenges, geographic challenges, even cultural challenges, and ways that they could best address them through the means of education opportunity for young business owners, entrepreneurs. And the similarities were so close in a lot of areas that it's kind of a shame that we're not learning from these international examples. So in this case, the Australian government operated a national broadband network, a wholesale mixed technology data network supported by 2 SkyMuster satellites. So specifically satellite connectivity, which isn't isn't to say the Elon Musk Starlink network is going to be kind of the saving grace of northern Canadian communities. because the infrastructure actually exists already to be able to tap into certain elements of this and even create our own independent Canadian systems. But in this instance, Australia was able to provide opportunities and increased opportunities to the Australian population through technology like that, based on trying to service a large geographic landscape. So potential applications for Manitoba, well, the huge distances and the remote communities of the Australian outback. So we have to think about those, again, rural populations, the geographic challenges themselves to those in northern Manitoba and northern Canada in general. The physical broadband connections technically are prohibitive. I mean, the study explores elements of the dark fiber optic network that's in Manitoba, but the reality here is laying fiber optic, especially in the northern part of Manitoba, is next to near impossible. So we need to be creative with the solutions, and the report kind of highlights elements of that. In this case, again, the similarities are very, very close. In Supai, Arizona, so high-speed internet comes to continental America's most remote villages. What we're taking a look at here is we're really kind of focusing on the idea of really hard to reach geographic locations and providing broadband opportunities there. So I just kind of highlighted a quote here, but in the matter of, or the interest of time, I just want to expedite to just my last slide here with the contact information. Part of this study is that we are hoping rather to set up phase 2, which is a continued exploration about the community level experience as it relates to education, equity, and broadband infrastructure. And as I pass everything back to Margaux, I just sort of want to leave that in the minds of everyone that's watching this video, that's participating in today's conversation, because ultimately at the end of the day, once we start to realize that these are all intertwined and interwoven concepts, we begin to sort of unravel exactly what an effective approach could be from a policy recommendation standpoint. So that ultimately is our end goal. So thank you so much. I'll pass it over to Margaux.
Thank you, Nathan. And when you have a second, yeah, perfect, with the screen there. Nathan, that we rushed you through that. I know you had so much more you could have shared with us, but thank you so much.
No problem, my pleasure.
I'm going to bring you back in a few moments when we get into our panel. So for those of you that are sitting on questions still, you can definitely put them in the chat at any time, and we will open it up at the end for questions with everyone. But before we get there, I'll just run through some really brief housekeeping. So everyone's been awesome with mute and having their video off, which I think is the best. You should see me spotlighted right now. When the panel starts, we'll just have only the panelists that'll kind of all turn their videos on. So there's quite a few panelists tonight. There's 7 of us across the board. So you'll see a bunch of cameras go on, but for the rest of you who have it all off, that's perfect still. So thank you for that. And again, please use the chat function. And if you want your question asked anonymously, you can just send it to Paula privately, and then Paula will pass it over to me secretly, and we'll just ask it like as an anonymous way. So the basic functions are, I think, pretty clear for everyone. So we'll get right into it. We have many panelists today, so I'm going to introduce them one by one and have them say a brief hello to you. So our panelists, if you can all come on camera, that would be awesome. And I will cancel my spotlight video so that, and then if you stay on mute, and Nathan will mute you. If you stay on mute, then we should be seeing the main person speaking if you're on speaker view. And we will get right into it. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Wayne Kelly. Wayne is the project coordinator of the Rural Development Institute. So Wayne is in the last stage of his PhD at the National University of Ireland in Galway, and working with rural communities to build digital skills for local youth. Influenced, however, by growing up here in rural and northern Canada, Wayne focuses his research and work on a wide range of rural research and development issues related to digital technologies. So in addition to his PhD studies, he helps lead the Rural Policy Learning Commons project at RDI in Brown University. And it's a project that's focused on increasing rural and northern policy impact, capacity, and knowledge exchange, both in Canada and internationally. So Wayne, I'm going to throw it to you right away here, and we're going to do this kind of one by one with the panelists, where I'm going to ask you to just talk for a brief moment about a key takeaway that you're hoping participants will take from today's forum. And feel free to put your own lens on it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Margaux, and thank you, Nathan. and ICTC. That was great, and I look forward to getting deeper into the report. But so my take on digital technology in rural Manitoba, especially when we're talking around youth and education, is that we need to really put a lot of effort into supporting the development of digital skills and the development of digital access for youth. So I see the divide, the digital divide that everybody talks about. From my perspective, it's a dual divide, and it's a capacity and an access issue. And we need to make sure that youth are building those skills in schools and out of schools in rural Manitoba. I think that's really important. I know there's some questions coming up for me later about the importance of digital literacy and the economy. So I'll sort of wait for more of that. But I think that's really the key thing, is that we need to make sure digital provides a fantastic opportunity for our rural youth to stay in rural, to learn in rural, to work in rural, and to raise families in rural. But we need to provide that support both from our education systems, from our communities, and from our other service organizations in rural Manitoba.
Thanks, Wayne. And yeah, you made a really great comment in the chat earlier too about the fact that Canadians aren't going to want to buy homes in areas where, or they're saying already, they're not willing to buy homes in areas without high-speed connectivity. So we have this great province with all these rural and beautiful northern areas that you can live in. But if we don't support them with that connectivity, we're forcing density that's not like necessarily the perfect thing. So that was a great comment in the chat there, Wayne.
And that stat was from about 2 years ago. It's from the 2019 CRTC report, I think, or maybe the CIRA report. So now post-COVID, I'm sure that's getting up to like 80 or 90% of Canadians.
Now the pressure is really on. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Wayne. Okay, so I'm going to throw it over next to Dr. Rob McMahon, who is the Associate Professor in the Media and Technology Studies Unit and the Department of Political Science in the Faculty of Arts at the University of Alberta. So Rob is a researcher too. He focuses on the development, adoption, and use of broadband and internet technologies by rural, remote, northern, and Indigenous communities. So his approach involves working with communities to ensure that their voices are all heard in stages of research. So really perfect for us in this project that we're working on. He and his partners are exploring ways to house project data and build research capacities within communities. And they're involved in efforts to contribute to digital policy and regulation. Rob also co-founded the First Mile Connectivity Consortium, which is a national nonprofit association of Indigenous technology organizations, and is currently the co-director of the Digital NWT, which is a project that aims to strengthen the foundation of community-based digital literacy in the Northern Territory. So not shy to remote areas. And Rob, if you'll jump in now, please, and give us your takeaway that you're really hoping our participants gain from today's forum.
No, sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for the invitation to participate in the panel today. Hi, everyone. I'm actually in Edmonton, Alberta, a couple provinces over. I have been to Manitoba a little bit years ago. I visited Blood Vein First Nation. And that was part of my PhD study, actually looking at this kind of topic and these kinds of questions around access issues in rural, remote, northern areas. And I was up there and learned a lot about, just a lot of the innovation going on in the communities. In particular, with my particular research area in the Indigenous communities and how they're setting up and operating broadband infrastructures themselves. So that's one thing I just wanted to point out with respect to the panel is just, there is that long history in Manitoba actually, as well as in other areas in Northern Canada of Indigenous service providers. So there's fantastic work that's been going on, since the earliest days of the internet, groups like Broadband Communications North and Clear Sky Connections. So I just wanted to point to that, like, yes, there is a digital divide. I think Nathan's presentation really illustrated that. And of course, within communities, in different regions, it really expands. So in the north, you're getting much slower services, but at the same time, we're also seeing a lot of creative innovation happening in those regions. So I really like those international examples, but I also think there's fantastic work going on in Manitoba as well. So that was one point I wanted to make. I know Nathan had mentioned as well, like there is some existing infrastructure. There's the hydro dark fiber network that might be a resource. as well as we hear about the low Earth orbital satellites, these kind of things. So there's lots of technologies out there, some of it possibly in place, others that may still be launched with Elon Musk and stuff. I love that discussion of digital literacy, and especially the appropriate approach to digital literacy, because of course one size fits all model doesn't work. We're finding that a lot in the Northwest Territories. And this is kind of tied into COVID too. Of course, it's really revealing a lot of those challenges with people trying to access education and then being reliant on connectivity to do so. But at the same time, like, I also wanted to stress that in a lot of areas, like, that's happened pre-COVID, it will probably extend beyond COVID unless we seize this as an opportunity to really help connect these regions and support those community providers in doing so. So yeah, that's just some early thoughts. So thanks everyone for opportunity to present.
Thanks, Rob. That's great. And certainly between what you said and some of the research Nathan was showing from other countries, you're right. Those examples are so important. I think sometimes we think like, well, it's just different here because we have so much spread out space and we have so many people rural and remote, right? But you look at the outback in Australia and many of these other areas, and they've been able to tackle it arguably in ways that are better than maybe where we're at so far. And so those are really good examples to reference because it's not an anomaly. We do have unique circumstances, but we're not totally the only ones. So great to reference those. Next, I'm going to introduce Kirsten Thompson. She serves as the divisional coordinator for ICTC for the, of ICT, too many acronyms. So for the Mountain View School Division. Kirsten oversees technology programming and purchasing for approximately 3,000 stakeholders. So she comes from the educator side of this equation and is a Microsoft education trainer, as well as a level 1 Google certified educator. Now, prior to this, she was employed as a high school classroom teacher for 6 years and also as a master's of education with a focus on curriculum and pedagogy. So she devoted her learning journey toward really understanding the purposeful implementation of technology in order to expand curricular objectives, specifically again in remote and rural classrooms. So you'll see a trend here. We're tailoring our panelists to really ensure they have that expertise. Kirsten is especially interested in the use of social media and the role it can play in improving transparency and accountability between education stakeholders. So Kirsten, I'm going to ask you the same question. If you could give us a key takeaway that you're hoping we leave with today.
Perfect. Thanks, Margaux. I'm really hoping that tonight we can shed light on how digital inequity, specifically when it comes to connectivity in Manitoba, is preventing students from accessing consistent experiences in public education. And I see this happen quite a bit when we're looking at rural and remote students and just what's available from a programming side compared to some of the options when you're in an urban setting. And right now, just with everything that's happening in our pandemic situation, I'm very concerned as the current approaches to remote learning, as outlined by Manitoba.The, have been designed with little flexibility and a high emphasis on consistent experiences. But as soon as our students leave our buildings, and sometimes even when they're in our buildings, we don't have consistent programming because that connectivity is so drastically different from community to community. Even within the division that I'm in Mountain View School Division, we have 4 schools that are in communities that don't even have cell service, not to mention high-speed internet access. So I really want to shed light on some of the inequities that's bringing up for student experiences.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. It's great to hear kind of that other side of the coin as well there when it comes to the experience that you're actually having kind of firsthand right now. So next I'm going to introduce Dr. Mike Nantais, who is an associate professor in the Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy in the Faculty of Education at Brandon University. Mike is a lifelong learner and has been a public school educator for over 30 years, mostly in high school math, science, and computers. For several years, Mike was also the ICT leader for Boys Vane School before spending 1 year as vice principal and 3 as principal. Mike has since obtained his Master's of Education at Brandon University and his PhD in Education at the University of Manitoba. Now, Mike's current research interests are in the broad area of educational technology and in particular social learning and the role of social media. But Mike, give us your key takeaway from the lens today around this topic that we're digging into.
Okay, first, thank you very much for asking me to be part of the panel. It's quite an honor to be here with all these distinguished people on here. And I'm going to embarrass Kirsten a bit because I taught Kirsten in 3 courses, and she just makes me proud. She's one of my top students of all time since I've been at Brandon University. Okay, enough embarrassing her. The whole concept digital divide has been around for years and years, and we know that. But as Nathan said, I think COVID-19 has really brought it to the forefront. And I guess from this conversation and presentation Nathan gave us, I think that the big thing I hope we get out of it is more awareness, more knowledge about the issue, because it's not going to go away unless we start advocating for changes and really pushing for it. So I'm hoping that this panel is and discussion is a start to that for us here in Manitoba. It's kind of distressing to see that we have the second slowest internet in the country. I know that for a fact that's true because I had to bump mine up when my daughter came from Toronto and had to work from home over the last month. So anyways, I think we just need to really learn as what we can and start advocating for these improvements.
Thanks so much, Mike, and thanks for being here today. It does, it's very important for us to have the reach all across the province. And so with your experience in different regions, we appreciate you kind of spreading this topic and helping to take those first steps. So next, I'm going to introduce Joel Templeman. Joel is a learning specialist, and he is supporting the Digit-All program with Tech Manitoba. So Joel and I get to work closely together. He is also the owner of leadthrough.ca. Now, Joel is retired as a major in the Canadian Armed Forces Reserve, where he specifically worked as a training officer and also a senior manager for a team of technicians at a national IT network operations center. So he's got some very neat experience from an IT perspective. And he also is a former public school teacher with most of his time spent in the special needs community. Joel has a Bachelor of Education and a master's degree in public administration with a focus in IT project management. He is currently completing a Master's of Education at the University of Calgary as well. And Joel is passionate about learning and the role that technology, specifically open and equitable access to internet, how that role is playing against the transformation of the educational system and lifelong learning. So Joel, you've been in this project right from day one. Tell us what you're hoping people take as a key takeaway from today's panel.
Well, first, thank you to everybody who's on the panel and everybody who's here, who's interested in this. I think what I want to take away is hope. This is a complex problem, and like Mike said, it's been going on for a long time, and a lot of people are involved in this. But it isn't an unsurmountable thing. There's a robot rolling around on Mars because somebody decided we need to put one there. So with the right will, with the political will, we can find the right people to work on this, and like Mike said, if we're advocating for it, but we can't just sit back and wait for it to fall from the sky, or Elon Musk to give it to us from the sky. We need to be actively involved. So there's a tipping point between it being complex and technical, but there are people working on it to try to help. So be active, advocate, be part of it. So hopefully that I'm speaking to the right people, because we need more people and more people in leadership positions in rural municipalities and school divisions and provincial governments and in the federal government to know what they're talking about when they're making these decisions. So we need to help inform them, and I think that's what we're trying to do right now. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joel. That really is ultimately a big takeaway of this whole research project, that we're hoping it does, lead toward more education and just having that big picture all in one place. And so that's where we're so thankful to all the researchers involved in this project who are really bringing that all together. So there is this one nice piece that we're hoping to give you in the next month or so here that will really overlay all of this at the same time. So thank you, Joel. Finally, last but not least, we have Sylvie Leblanc, who is a junior research coordinator at ICTC, so the Information Communications Technology Council of Canada. and in the National Center of Expertise on the Digital Economy. So with ICTC, Sylvie brings her long-standing interest in education, inequality, and health to the conversation on technology. And Sylvie is currently working on her MA in sociology with Nipissing University. And Sylvie, over to you. Please tell us what the key takeaway is that you're hoping our participants get from today's forum.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for having me. I'm really hoping that today people really learn about the rural and urban split. As Nathan pointed out, the CRTC called the broadband connectivity to be a basic telecom service in Canada, yet unfortunately many rural centers do not have it. So I'm really hoping we get to learn more today about how to remedy that.
Thanks, Sylvie. And I'm going to stay with you for a second and ask another question. So tell us, from the perspective of a researcher on this project, what's one of the things that really stood out to you in terms of the current situation? I think for us, things that stand out might be a little different than someone who's so deep into it. So was there something that really stood out to you in terms of the current situation here in Manitoba?
One thing that really stood out to me was how many projects have been underway in Canada to create an equal playing field for the broadband access across the nation. So in Manitoba specifically, projects began as early as 2002 with the rural and northern stream of the infrastructure bank, and it continues even now to the Universal Broadband Fund, which is launching soon. There have been various projects in the intervening time, but there's still so much unlit dark fiber in so many rural and remote communities in the north that don't have broadband access. So that really stood out to me.
Thank you. And again, to those of you who are listening in, if any of this prompts follow-up questions, please just throw them in the chat and we're happy to engage in that way that really is most interesting to everyone on the call here. But Joel, I'm gonna go kind of back up the list to you here. Explain please to the group where Tech Manitoba plays a part in this research and why you were keen to get this going.
Absolutely. So it's a bit of a backtrack. We started off with the digital project and working with teachers on my side anyway for professional development, trying to bring more tech into the classroom, trying to really change the way learning is done, right? Really trying to capitalize on the good things that tech can bring, and that student-led learning, project-based learning, a lot of new ways to really revolutionize learning and the skills that we want to see in the 21st century. So people who are more collaborative and are able to learn, and lifelong learning, right? Occupations now just need you to continue to skill up constantly throughout your whole life. So those are types of things that technology can bring to it. But what came very clear was we were able to do that perfectly well in some locations, and teachers came and we did these great workshops, and then they went back to their classes. But we were expanding and going into more rural and more remote areas, and people would go through these workshops, and at the end of the day they'd say, this is amazing, this is great, I can't use any of this, and there was many reasons why, and we know what the reasons are, but it was heartbreaking to think that it's not the fault, the teacher or the kids or the schools or whatever. There's a number of factors that go into it, but at the end of the day, the reality of student A and student B who are just doing, living life, are getting wider and wider. So those experiences are doing it. And like Wayne and Rob are saying, it's driving people to places that they may not normally choose to live if they didn't want to. So the research came from kind of circling back and saying, let's really dive into this, and really we need to find out what that really looks like in Manitoba, what's going on, what are the problems identified, what can do about them, where are the
Oh, I lost Joel on my end. Anybody else? I'm seeing some nods. All right, Joel.
Okay, you back?
Oh no, okay, you're back. We lost your final point.
Community driven. The solutions are going to come from the communities.
Okay, awesome. And Joel, you made some really good connections in there about teachers and if they what they have access to and what they're actually capable of doing, whether they want to do it and physically can do it, being kind of two different things. So Kirsten, I want to throw it back to you on that topic. As someone who supports teachers and students, what are you seeing as one of the big impacts when it comes to actual day-to-day activities across the province for educators?
Well, if we're looking at day-to-day impacts, I'm reporting from my office, not because I want to be at work at 8 o'clock at night, because I don't have sufficient internet connectivity at my home in order to run this type of meeting. And I think if someone were to see my home, I definitely wouldn't fit the remote location. I'm less than 1 mile off of a primary highway system. I'm less than 1 mile out of a town. And I'm luckily that I'm in a privileged position where I can pay for a high internet package and I can pay for my own cell booster. And it's still not sufficient for me to run activities such as this. So I think it's like that type of example is just even more compounded across rural and especially northern Manitoba. So in Mountain View School Division, we're actually really fortunate right now. The majority of our student population is face-to-face with us. However, we do have about half of our high school students in Dauphin engaged in remote learning 50% of the time, as well as a significant number of medically compromised students who are enrolled in remote learning full-time through our Westman Consortia. But whether our students are with us or in remote learning, we're really relying on connectivity to provide robust educational experiences. Now, tech integration has been something that we've been working on all along, but in our pandemic situation, we're relying on tech even more because it allows us to supplement our lack of collaborative experiences, our lack of field trips, lack of guest speakers, lack of authentic audiences for our students, and just building those basic digital literacy skills. But even for our students who are in the building with us, our current divisional network is unable to support our needs. And I actually just finished negotiations to increase our bandwidth at almost every single site in our division. Our teachers are very frustrated because they're losing instructional time because they're loading materials, or they're just feeling so incredibly overwhelmed because they're attempting to create equitable learning experiences for students when only half of them will have access to internet. And then from the student and family side, they're frustrated. They know they're not getting that same educational opportunity, and they're really starting to feel the strain after months of increased data charges. So my primary concern is that the digital inequity is going to lead to a widening of the gap between Manitoba students. And also our current situation, I think, is establishing a very dangerous precedent where we're relying on Manitoba families to pay for high-speed internet to access public education.
Very well said, Kirsten. Thank you so much. And I saw a lot of head nodding during that, and you can see some comments in the chat now that you have a chance. But so Mike, staying on that topic of someone who's an educator and has been administrator as well, talk to us a little bit about how you see the current situation ranking as far as, you know, level of importance or action that we need to take.
That's a tough question. Thanks for asking. Yeah, and over 42 years as an educator, I've seen all kinds of priorities and things come and go. And in education in Manitoba, there's so many things right now with, you know, the education review going to be expected shortly and the implications that will have, and so on. But there's just so many issues. But this one is definitely near the top because there's so much need for the use of digital technologies now, with especially in the pandemic. But even if we get back to normal, we still live in a digital world, and access is vitally important. And I think, you know, we've talked a lot about remote and rural areas, and it's more than there. As someone pointed out in the chat, that someone 20 minutes outside of Winnipeg can't connect. We have students living in poverty or near poverty situations, and they can't afford the connectivity at home or devices to use. So I think it's a very complex issue, but a vital one, and we need to look at all aspects of it and do what we can to, I'm sorry to use the saying, but level the playing field. And as Kirsten said, close that gap so someone who is does their schooling in northern Manitoba or a rural community or the middle of Winnipeg have equal opportunities make use of the tools at our disposal.
Certainly, thank you, Mike. And I think probably a lot of us are thinking along the exact same vein. So over to Wayne now. Your background in research is focused a little bit more on economic development. So specifically in rural, remote, and in Indigenous communities. Can you speak to us a little bit about the importance of the role that education plays in that, and perhaps even connectivity within education? So how that ties into economic development in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we've talked lots about, you know, COVID, and I mean, it's become really clear how important it is to be able to work from home. Kirsten wasn't able to work from home tonight as part of this. And, you know, there's a cost to that, whether it's her time in terms of the travel, it's the gas money. I know the R2B2 Center, it's a rural broadband center at University of Guelph, calculates about $10,000 in savings per year for people who work from home half time. Not even full time, but if they're able to work from home half time, so that's $10,000 that they can save on gas, car, even clothes, right? I mean, I don't know how many people are wearing dress clothes on top and bottom, but you know, if you're working from home, you know, there's all these savings, and that was pre-COVID, those numbers, right? So COVID, again, we've already sort of highlighted, like COVID really brought to the forefront the importance from a bunch of different perspectives, but including an economic perspective of being able to still work from home. The other side of that, though, on the education side, is digital skilling. You know, ICTC actually has a good report, and Nathan, I mean, I know you and I are going to talk more about this, but I think about 2-3 years ago, you guys put out a report that said, you know, 34% of Canadian employers reported some difficulties filling positions due to digital skill gaps. And actually just this week, the World Economic Forum said that 50% of all employees are going to need to be re-skilled in the next 5 years. So, and those skills are increasingly and almost predominantly centering around digital skills. So for rural youth, digital is the future for employment, for education. There's going to be digital elements. Right now it's, you know, very digital, and it's going to continue to grow that way. And being able to provide those digital opportunities in rural communities are absolutely critical, because I think Kirsten and Mike described it really well. For not being able to give them equal opportunity to that education, not only is that digital divide going to be affecting their connectivity, we've already talked about it affecting their digital skills, and that's going to affect employment opportunities, well-being, quality of life, all of those key pieces that sort of trickle on from both education and employment. And I just wanted to share, when Kirsten was talking, that reminded me about one example from my research in terms of the affordability. And it's not just the affordability of that access, it's the affordability of that data. I was talking to youth in South Central rural Manitoba, and there was youth in town in the focus group, and there was youth from out of town in the focus group. And these were all grade 12 youth. And the example that they gave to me in terms of how connectivity affects their lives and how the cost of data affects their lives was planning their prom. They had a Facebook Messenger chat to plan their prom, and they would all chat on it every month, sort of over the course of the year. Well, about halfway through every month, there'd be a couple of those students that would disappear. And those were always the out-of-town students who had hit their data limits, and either they knew they couldn't go on anymore, or their parents weren't letting them go on anymore because they couldn't afford it. And so they'd come back on at the start of the month and join in again, but they were only getting two weeks a month to participate in that prom planning online chat. And such a simple thing, but it had a substantial impact on these graduating students. So that affordability, both of the access but of the data, is so key as well. And it's also, as we've talked about, that divide, it's between urban and rural, but it's also within rural and within different groups within rural as well.
If you don't mind, Wayne, I just wanted to add into a piece of that I think is really important. And it's sort of one of those areas of privilege that I think a lot of us, especially when we think about the perspectives of industry, but talking about required or demanded skill sets of potential employees when joining any type of ICT related organization, even if only loosely connected. So I'm talking very arm's reach industries here. But the reality is it's becoming more and more frequent that we're hearing in a variety of our different research studies that core digital literacy skills are going to be fundamental for employment opportunities for individuals seeking gainful employment. That perspective right there has so much inherent privilege associated with it, because when talking about digital literacy skills, there's so much that factors into what's considered digital literacy. That core connectivity, as we've discussed at the beginning of this, we have now conversations in your area of expertise with economic development as it relates. Like, there's so many different elements that play into this conversation, but core digital literacy is what everything kind of boils down to. COVID has sort of accelerated this conversation as it created this panel discussion, has created part and parcel a large component of what the study seeks to accomplish eventually too. And I think that, like, if industry is asking, the baseline being core digital literacy skills, we have members of this entire panel that can't even be at home to participate. And we think that this is sort of the baseline now. Like, if that doesn't paint the clearest picture, I possibly, for politicians, policymakers, I don't know what will. We have experts in the room right now that can't simply just connect from home. That's mind-boggling.
Absolutely, and I think Kirsten just added to that as well in the chat that, you know, that stat that she put up there, that 71% of the division students access remote learning via mobile, and those that are out of town or can't afford it aren't going to be able to finish the month. Aren't going to be able to learn for the whole month. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks to you both, and to all the panelists. If there are things that you want to kind of add in on that your fellow panelists are commenting on, please, feel free to come off mic and jump in. I will, throw Rob a question here directly, but certainly, jump in as we go. So, Rob, to you, I want to ask if you can help us compare Manitoba to the rest of the country. So you've done a lot of work with First Mile Connectivity Consortium and Digital Northwest Territories, where you've been kind of face-to-face with these issues in different areas of Canada. Looking at this information now, how does Manitoba's experience compare to you?
Yeah, well, I was frantically nodding because I'm hearing a lot of similar challenges. I mean, that idea of people, it's almost like a tax on innovation and participation. The more that you participate, the more you have to pay. And I heard that a lot in the North as well, that people would come to the end of their data caps, they'd be worried about a big bill, or they'd get slowed down, and they would actually change their online behavior. So this is students as well as like people working in businesses, all kinds of things, right? So definitely we hear that. And you think about that on a larger scale too. I mean, it happens with individuals, but also of course with organizations and schools, right? I mean, there's a bandwidth bill at the end of the month. I wanted to pick up with that was something that Nathan had mentioned with his report on that sort of idea of the return on investment, and this idea that, as we can think of ourselves as consumers of this bandwidth and consumers of this service, right? And of course, like, educators have a huge role to play in that. Sometimes they get called anchor tenants, especially in these smaller communities. They can be some of the biggest bandwidth users, right? So I think there's a real opportunity for partnerships there with service providers. And this is what we saw in a lot of the nonprofit providers. In these cases of small remote communities, that it was claimed that there's not a business case in order to deploy service or deliver services. But if you have like a partnership with these anchor tenants, that provides that steady bandwidth use that we're also seeing now, at the individual level. So I just wanted to point to that too, that of course, like, educators have a role in the digital literacy side of things, but also as like major customers and supporters of the business cases in these more remote areas. I just wanted to pick up something as well on the digital literacy side is, the idea of digital literacy is, of course, it's the ways we're using technologies. How do we set up and use applications online? But it can extend to the infrastructure too, right? So imagine like students and others actually learning how to roll out their own networks, set up routers, that kind of thing. I think that's a creative way to think about digital literacy, where you can kind of combine the delivery of connectivity, along with learning about different aspects of technological systems. I think there's a role for educators to play in that too. How does the internet work? How do we actually get connectivity at home? And then what is all this bandwidth stuff? So I just wanted to throw that there too. But yeah, it was great. Not great. I mean, they're big challenges, but just seeing these kinds of shared challenges and hopefully solutions across different regions is great.
Thanks, Rob. And certainly that's a great place to go with the conversation as far as what we can do in a positive way to kind of elicit some change. So, and maybe Nathan, I'll throw this one back to you, who we kind of cut your time short in the presentation at the beginning, but what are some important next steps that we can do to address these issues being identified in the study and by the panel?
So it's a good question. Actually, Mike just brought it up as well. So I'm actually going to refer to some of my coursework currently in the area of community development, which is the concept of community development is often founded in this idea that research sort of paves the way for decision-making to take place at either the community or potentially even the political level. And I think that when we originally started having our conversations, and I'm glad I have this opportunity to talk about sort of where this project came from and versus where it went, the idea really started as this sort of, again, to use the term serendipitous relationship between Tech Manitoba and ICTC, because we started realizing that there's a lot of parallels in talking about tech equity. And as a result of that, we were sort of kind of focusing in or honing in on exactly what it is that we could do that would make sense for continued action. Because time and time again, we see research studies that come out and they get either reviewed once by a politician, bureaucrat, doesn't matter, gets tabled, and then we never see it again. And that's nobody's goal. The goal is to create research that found certain action items or certain policy recommendations that aren't, the barrier to entry on them isn't so high that they become sort of a moot point. The idea here is that there's like a tangible byproduct to go on a phase-based sort of upward trajectory of change. So when I use the term phase one, the study is considered phase one. As far as I'm concerned, members of Tech Manitoba are concerned as well, as roundtable members that are actually in today's conversation here. The idea is this research, which is the foundational element, is paving the way for additional kind of stages, additional phases to then take certain policy recommendations that the study is hoping to at least start to shape, not necessarily propose, but start to kind of think about and tinker around with. The idea is it's going to continue to phase two, is that community level study. It's that request about what's actually taking place. We have examples that have been shown today about what that looks like in Manitoban communities. Now, armed with that primary research, coupled with this environmental scan and the data that we've created, the byproduct of that is going to be very difficult for a politician to say, I don't know what to do with this. I'm just going to pass the buck. And I mean, to call a spade, when there's enough voices and enough fists kind of beating down a door, armed with adequate research of both the environmental scan, international examples, and primary research from community, nobody can just turn that away. And that's the goal here. Like, what are we trying to achieve? Change. And we do that in a methodical way that's armed with the research, armed with the industry experts, which we have on today's panel. That's how we push that forward.
You know, Nathan, I think that was so perfectly well said. And I think a lot of people on this panel are as passionate about this as you are. So maybe this is for you or for other panelists in their own individual, with their own individual answers. But how can concerned individuals or groups participating today or seeing this recording in the next couple of weeks here, how can they personally get involved and help with this?
I mean, I could start. I know Joel's probably got armed with information because at least from personal experience, I can't speak to anyone else, but as a result of this study, as a result of these conversations, the roundtable discussion, meeting the industry experts, I'm actually now volunteering my time to get more involved in Manitoba's ecosystem. There's problems in Ontario. Don't get me wrong, I'm from northeastern Ontario. We are just engulfed in our own issues, which I'm trying to change at a local level through code design, which was mentioned in my introduction. But I want to push the ball forward. We're armed with the opportunity to push the ball forward. And I think having individuals that just want to change for the better, want the community to change for better, accessibility, tech equity, you'll find, like, with the right amount of initiative, you'll find opportunities. I communicated with Tech Manitoba. I found individuals like Joel and yourself. We started conversations. We started realizing there's other opportunities elsewhere. And with that kind of motivation, with that sort of, I don't know, grit is a term to use. Connecting with industry experts like yourself, we'll get pointed in the right direction. We'll start to implement the change we want to see.
Thanks, Nathan. And Joel, did you want to add to that too?
I think that Rob had mentioned too that there's a lot of groups who are working individually who have collectively a lot of say. Like the school, if you took a look at the bandwidth of all of the schools, of all of the learning traffic, if you were to actually if you could map that, if you could add that up, that's a lot. And if you were to put a dollar value to that, that's a big number. So you know, there are some areas where you know, groups need to get together. And that said, understanding that this is complex and there are organizational issues and there's just no time. Even the way that the CRTC operates or the regulatory bodies operate, they have processes for consultation, but they're lengthy and they are difficult and it takes resources. So what I'm hoping, and this is something that Tech Manitoba is doing in this effort, is to bring research to the table that can be presented to decision makers, which is exactly what we're doing right now. This type of involvement with everybody on the call right now, providing feedback into this, putting real names and faces to these stories, and not just being able to assemble anecdotal information, but you know, concrete evidence that we can say this needs, these are the trends and this is what the impact is. And hopefully we'll start to see, we can show that there are costs that aren't just individual direct costs. If you start looking at all of the costs, what is the cost to the mental health and well-being of people? What is the lost economic opportunities? What businesses are not coming to Manitoba? What people in Manitoba are not starting up their own business, or what small community is, you know, on the brink of not being supportable because too many people have left, right? So if you start adding up those costs, they become very good. So collectively, I mean, not to say that there's one solution for any place. So I think it's a combination. It's small community level solutions, but large collective argument and information and advocacy, right? So coming together where it makes sense, and then acting independently or regionally, community-wise, rural municipalities getting into co-ops with school divisions, you know, school divisions working together. Any number of solutions are there, and not having a one-size-fits-all. Even that alone, arguing for that, for there being multiple different ways to approach projects, funding at the federal level, all those types of things. There's a number of different ways we can do this, and this conversation and this type of research is just starting that conversation.
Thanks, Joel. And Nathan, you know, there's been an amazing chat here, and Nathan just added another really good point that amongst all these comments, we are in really perfect timing to be having this conversation. To Nathan's point earlier, it's really something that, you know, can't be ignored right now, at least in the same way. And so that really, again, to reiterate, is why we brought everybody together to create this research project, so that we did have that all in hand. So if anyone is participating today thinking, you know, I'd like to give an anecdote when we do the secondary research, or I'd like to, you know, talk to the team here, please reach out to us directly. You can reach out to Joel or to Nathan, or to, you know, anyone that you know personally who you're seeing their faces here. We'll get you to the right person. And Wayne, were you going to add to that as well?
Yeah, no, I think those are all really good points, and I'm first in line to sort of advocate to both provincial and federal governments the importance of broadband and the need for more support. But we also need to make sure that our municipal governments are hearing it as well. And it's not enough anymore that they can be waiting for someone else to solve this problem. Rob mentioned all the Indigenous communities in Manitoba, Northern Ontario, and across the country that have had to solve this on their own. And some of our best stories in Canada come from communities that have had to solve this on their own. Firstmile.ca, is that right? Rob, if you want to toss that into the chat. So there's actually stories and a database of stories and successes in Indigenous communities across Canada that Rob's part of, that provides some really good examples. And I've been working on this lately on the policy perspective at municipal level. And the perfect example, I think, that we've sort of stumbled upon is, yes, most rural municipalities now will have broadband connectivity as a key priority item to solve in their community. But how many actually have budget line items against it, right? How many have staff members that are focused on developing those solutions? Somebody put it in the chat really well that, you know, when Joel started and he was solution focused. We need municipalities to be solution focused. And so yes, the feds and the provinces need to step up. They need to do a better job. We need to make sure that it's fair across the board, that there's equitable access, equitable prices across the board. But from what we've seen so far, the majority of those solutions in rural Canada, remote Canada, northern Canada, have come at the municipal level. And so we need to make sure that our municipal leaders are leading the charge as well.
Thank you, Wayne. Very good anecdote there too. And I was writing down some of your quotes there as you were going, because we've had so many amazing comments so far today. You know, in the chat and some questions coming through, a common theme that I'm kind of seeing is around exactly what we've been getting to here, but that advocacy for broadband connectivity at an affordable price. And so, does anyone have anything that they think they can add along that line? So really, like, you know, some people are even commenting with anecdotes from 25 years ago to now, kind of saying, have we even really seen that big of a difference from then to now? And, you know, what's going to make a difference today? So does anyone have anecdotes of what is being done, if anything, related to improving that broadband connectivity in Manitoba?
So part of the research study, once it's published, is actually, and Sylvie might be able to talk about this in greater detail, but part of the study is actually taking a look at current issues as it relates to infrastructure development, as it relates specifically to Manitoba. So the report will do a good job sort of exploring elements of that and things that are actually taking place right now, as opposed to things that are in the 5-year kind of forecast. But I think that's a really good question to consider is we're discussing all these like great ideas, great pathways forward, great questions that need to be answered. I love Wayne's comment on economic development implications for the municipal level when priorities shift. So you can invest in roads if that's a higher priority item. Meanwhile, they're trying to appeal for new business to move in the area, but your broadband infrastructure is poor, so it's not even an option. Like things like that, just really interesting to consider. But in terms of what's actually happening in Manitoba, definitely will be an element that we'll be exploring.
Thank
I
you.
know within Mountain View School Division, we've met with as many service providers as we can find, Rogers and TELUS and Bell and Westman, to try and find some option to meet the needs of our families. And a lot of them had really, really great plans and promotions on paper. And I think there are people within the province that they were able to serve with these plans where it was subsidized. But I know in our area, when we actually laid out the map with what their offering was, it did not work. It would not even reach my house a mile off of the highway. We had to have our students with driveways directly on the highway and only in certain communities for it to have access. I mean, Rob shared the plan that they were able to get for $32. Things like that is fantastic. And I keep hearing these really good stories. And I think that's a start. And I think it's awesome that they're starting, but we just need to expand that network so that it can be available for all of the divisions. Because you talked about budget. I mean, my budget for our internet is almost $500,000 for the division to have internet. And that's not expanding it out to any of our families, our Wi-Fi hotspots, any of these extras that we're now being required to do. So affordability is key.
I think that it's also time to be creative. I think the community needs to act right away to put in some solutions, but at the same time, it shouldn't be their responsibility, nor do they really have the resources to do that long term. I think that the communities need to act to bridge the gap, but they need to know that the cavalry is coming over the hill at some point. There needs to be long-term, deep infrastructure. Dark fiber has to be, in this mix. There needs to be a bigger picture planning, and at no time are we saying like the internet service providers are, evil entities. They're just commercial entities, right? They have shareholders and they need to make money. That's their job. That's literally their job. So what we can't do, and what we've done a number of times, and I think Rob Fisher mentioned it too. You know, this didn't happen 5 years ago. This happened 25 years ago, 35 years ago, right? We've been doing this for a long time, and rural communities have been supplementing for a long time. But we need to have that big solution. Like, why are we engineering for 50 down when we know that by the time that's in place, we'll need 200 down, right? Why aren't we engineering for gig, right? Like, these types of conversations are technical again, and they're complex, but we need to be having them in one arena while action is happening in another arena, because it's clear from this conversation is that the communities can't wait. So some things have to happen, but those solutions are not necessarily going to be perfect or long lasting. So we need to do both. We need to be able to get the investment in the country, federally, provincially. We need to get those wheels spinning in the right direction as well. The commercial aspects of that are part of that. Everybody has a part in this. No one group has the solution, and no one group is the problem. There needs to be kind of a way to get this to be a solvable solution. As long as we all agree that this is the end goal, we can get everything sorted, right?
Yeah, the one thing I just want to add to that, and it's kind of a tip of the hat to Wayne's research as well, but early on in the study, from sort of a steering perspective, we ended up having a key informant interview session with an ISP provider that was able to give us a little bit more boots on the ground insight into the challenges that certain remote communities have from an infrastructure point of view. So to speak to Joel's point, certain for-profit revenue-driven organizations, if a community only has a handful, a couple dozen, maybe even 100, 200 individuals living within it, the broadband infrastructure, the physical line that's laid into those communities, the ROI, so the return on the investment to actually lay that, maintain it, and keep it up to date, it just simply isn't there. And so it's not realistic to look to the old traditional examples of how broadband infrastructure can be provided. And to speak further to Joel's point, getting creative, so that's a responsibility at the end of the day to the province, the municipality, individual communities, like this collective, but there's a lot of accountability in the individual kind of instances too. And I think it's important. I like the term creativity because it speaks to everything that everyone's discussed so far. And I think that ownership, we're not going to get anywhere by continuing to deflect responsibility and onus on others, specifically the big telecoms, even the province. Starting to take a little bit of that accountability and responsibility on to a certain extent will end up driving the innovation that we want to see in that, like you said, creativity.
Nathan, well, while we're on that topic, we did get a question come through in advance of today during registration, asking us when we envision that Elon Musk's Starlink project will be approved in Canada so that some of our regions can get internet access that way. Does anyone want to comment on that one?
Maybe Rob knows. He referenced it as well, so maybe I'll just defer to him.
I'm actually going to, because what you're just saying, I'm going to bring it down from space, right, to like hyper local, okay? Just this idea that we always think about, we need to connect to the internet, and that is a huge issue. And we've been talking a lot about digital inequities and stuff, connectivity issues. But if you look even at the level of the school, right, what role can schools and educators play in maybe circulating resources within just their local environment? Can they act not as internet service providers, but is there some kind of networking system where they could maybe distribute curriculum to students? It doesn't even need like an external kind of link to the rest of, the rest of the planet, so to speak. So I'm not trying to like say that there's, of course there needs to be internet equity, but are there other kind of solutions at that hyper local level to really, fill in some of those gaps while another solution like, space internet or fiber or whatever it may be comes along? So just wanted to throw that in the mix too.
Space internet, I need to adopt that.
Yeah, the CRT, the official answer is the CRTC did approve it on October 15th. So they're all cleared to go. And they say that they're going to have trials in southern Canada and northern US by the end of the year, so Christmas time. So will this solve all the problems of the planet? I'm not sure, but it is something that's going ahead, and they're going to have 1,200 satellites floating around real soon. So what the project does show me is if a person or a group has the political will and can find the cash, anything scientifically is possible. There are many ways to solve this. This isn't about the technology being a limitation. It's about us agreeing that there is a problem and then agreeing to solve that problem.
Certainly. And, you know, we're getting like right to the end here. So I know that we could keep going, and I'm sorry, panelists who have more to add. I'll get you to add it in the chat while I'm wrapping up here. But we have had a really, really amazing conversation. Panelists and in the chat has been very active tonight, which tells me that everyone who is here is really interested or dedicated to this topic. And I really want to say that I appreciate everyone who's here who is kind of admitting to learning or really open to asking questions as we go. We will definitely be saving the whole chat as well. So, and we'll share kind of key components with everyone, or maybe just all of it. We'll kind of look through with our team. And this has also been recorded today too, like we mentioned earlier. So, you know, we're not going to lose this great information. We'll share some of those links and things that came through in the chat. And again, just a thank you to everyone who is kind of is really engaged in here, saying like, you know, asking a lot of questions and prompting, and Kirsten giving anecdotes from where you live so that people can really understand what is truly happening. And that's why you brought together such a vast group here to speak tonight, because we wanted to really frame the issue from different sides. And like I'm kind of having to jump in here, we could have a conversation that certainly goes on for quite some time, but this is where in a few weeks, in a month from now, when we have this first piece out, we're gonna have ways to bring people back together to really showcase it and provide it to anyone who wants to see it. So hopefully, you know, we're not planning on hiding it away. So thank you so much. And we will be sharing that with everyone who did join today and register, because we've got your email and we can share that with you as much as you'd like. I do want to just give a big thank you, especially to our panelists and to ManACE for hosting the event tonight, and everyone who took the time to join us. We will follow up in the next few days, like I'm promising here. And for those interested in a copy of this research, when it's completed, if there's other contacts you have that you want to ensure they too are kept in the loop, just email Joel Templeman, whose email's been in the chat here, and we'll put it again right away. And anyone really passionate about internet connectivity in Manitoba can also consider joining the Internet Society. We'll put that link in the chat here too. It's free to join there, and there's a ton of great information on projects going on around the world. And just to note, there are efforts underway to formalize a Manitoba chapter of the Internet Society to focus on issues of connectivity in our schools and in our community. And again, that's something to reach out to Joel to if you want more information as it becomes available. And of course, ICTC2, this is Nathan, who did our presentation, started us off with a presentation today. And again, we will be sharing more of this. But for now, because it is 8:30 on the dot, and we wanted to keep some of your evening safe, thank you everyone for participating, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Bye.